Hi, everybody. This is Margarita Quihuis, and I am your host for Solve for X Solutions that Spark Change. People like to define peace as the absence of conflict, but real peace is about how the world works together on a micro level. It comes down to how we interact with each other and our environment. Things neglected at a micro level scale up to cause some pretty scary issues like climate change, poverty, and even outright war. That we are solving for X, where X is everything from AI to business to urban planning and beyond. If it exists, we're trying to find a way to build peace into it. We're done talking about the problems that plague the world. It's time to find solutions. So today I have Avantika Mohapatra
Yeah.
as my guest. Avantika is a mechanical engineer and product designer who's bridging the gap between designers and data scientists while creating AI-driven products and services. Now, on a personal note, her addiction to reading books and baking is matched by her love for cars, driving, discovering aesthetic products, and traveling. So, Avantika, welcome to our little show here. So, cars, let's talk about cars for a moment. What do you love? Which cars do you love?
So this is a piece of my personal history, but I was an automotive engineer and I was
Mhm.
working with BMW and I always loved cars. When I was growing up, uh, my dad would take me to the desert and then we would just drive when I was like 14 and that's how my love for driving kicked in. But favorite cars, I'm going to be very loyal and say BMW M4.
I see. Well, I grew up in Southern California, so big car culture in Southern California. And, I didn't really think about it because everyone had it. We don't have snow in California, in Southern California, so our cars don't get rusty. They don't look like hell in a few years, right? The East Coast, everyone's car looks like hell. But in California, you could have a beautiful vintage car. And I remember growing up just the car culture of my neighbors having all these different types of cars. They would have Opals, or they would have, I remember there was a guy who lived up the street from me who had a muscle car. And my aunt had this beautiful Camaro, right? And when I was growing up, the just Camaros and Mustangs and it was just fun, right? Le Mans. There was a and the what I really wanted when I was a teenager was I wanted a Mercedes 450 SL because that was sort of like the convertible when I was growing up. And then not too long ago, I saw this, and this was in San Diego, of course, on the freeway, a beautiful vintage Carmen Ghia convertible in that British racing green color.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It
Yeah.
was beautiful. It was just like this object of desire. Now, it's not like it was the greatest convertible in the world, but boy, did it look sweet. It was just gorgeous. So I have a fondness for vintage cars. The new cars don't do anything much for me. It's like, meh, okay. But I like to drive. I had a Camry that was a stick shift, the sport package. So I was like, you know, I was trying to persuade my son to learn how to drive a stick shift, and he didn't have any interest in it. It's all push button now. It's no fun.
That's true, but no, I feel like real driving comes when you're actually like changing gears and like actually driving. That's fun.
Like you're using your whole body. You got your feet going, you got your hands going, and your tunes.
Yep. And
Um,
you're actually in
yeah,
a video
knobs. So design. I think design brings so much juice to life.
game. Yeah.
And I think that designers in particular so they're sort of like at the front end of because everything that we touch, that we literally touch, has been crafted or influenced by a designer. Yeah. And how did you make the transition from mechanical engineering in cars to product design and now AI? Tell me that story.
So when I was working at BMW, I realized that I could do something more creative. Like everyone growing up, everyone used to tell me that, you're creative, you should be doing something creative. And I felt that. I felt that when I was working. And I was like, okay, this is it. I need to do something creative. And that's when I started learning more about what is happening in design right now, what can I do, like actually exploring. I took some time off and I built my portfolio, and I was invested. I was completely invested, and I was like, okay, I need to know what I can do because. And the best part about being a part of design is that the way I see it, it's kind of like a manifestation of intent. So you
Mm.
can literally like actually solve problems through various disciplines of design. And I think that's something very interesting, and that's when I knew like I have to do this. But in order to take for people to take me seriously, I had to get a master's degree. So that's when I came to Sweden, and I guess I slowly transitioned into AI. So it was very gradual.
Hmm.
So it was actually very organic. It happened super easily. So yeah.
So, like Scandinavia, especially, it has a particular design sensibility. And you coming from the outside, so like if I lived in Sweden or Denmark, or, I would probably take it for granted to go like, yeah, this is how we design things. But you coming from the outside, what did you really notice that was distinctive about the Scandinavian or Swedish mindset around design?
The simplicity, the
Hmm.
absolute simplicity. Everything here is so simple. It's so minimal. It and but at the same time so functional. I think that really changed the way you look at things. Like a design does not have to be complicated. It does not have to solve all purposes. As long as it does that one thing it needs to do, it's all good. And the way they just put everything forward aesthetically as well, like it was beautiful. And that was something new because coming from America to Europe, it was, and I guess like in the US, everything is like a little bit loud when it comes to product design.
Hmm.
So, and I didn't see that in Europe. It was very subtle.
Interesting. I I think a lot about design and customer experience and user experience around emotion. So I have this thing about how do you design for emotion, and the way it relates to our work in peace is how we show up in the world. So I think peace is something that's very embodied. Often there's this thing like we need to change people's attitudes, and it's hard to do that because you can't see inside the black box of somebody's head, but you can see the actions they take, and you can see the emotions that are elicited when they're interacting with other people, right? So how do we communicate with people? Do we do it? What's our affect? Is it curious? Is it compassionate? Is it kind? Is it angry? Is it frustrated? And so on. But those emotions can be designed for, or they can be triggered unintentionally. And so when you talk about designers and intent, when you're designing something, what is the spectrum of things that you're considering in terms of how that person's going to interact with it in terms of mind, body, soul, I guess.
So when you're designing anything, I think the key is always the user is the main person. You're designing for the user. If you're not doing something the user is going to be happy with, then what have you designed in the end? So I think that's the main thing. Like, as long as it solves a purpose, as long as it's not affecting or harming anything while it's doing solving this purpose, that, in my opinion, is a good design. And primarily, like everything comes secondary to user satisfaction. So as long as you
Yeah.
meet the just
But we can do that without delighting people. I mean, you could have something that's purely functional.
yeah,
It does the thing,
yeah,
but it doesn't elevate you,
okay,
right?
okay, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So I'm curious in terms of designers, in terms of their toolkit, if does such a toolkit exist
yeah.
to say, okay, I want to intentionally when person designs this. So there's something about let's see, where is it? I have it here somewhere. My game designer, Chris Bennett. Those of you who listen to me will over time hear me quote Chris Bennett. We was talking about the satisfaction of the click of
Yeah.
like the AirPods case, right? Because it's got a magnetic and it just like it's a very satisfying click. It's tactile and it's, there's that sound and there's this feeling to it. It has a certain heft to it. I mean, they could have made it a much lighter weight plastic and it would have been functional. But
Mm-hmm.
but there's something about how it, mm, how
How
it
it
feels
feels.
in your hand, right? How it feels in your hand and that clicking, clicking. It's like, ooh, isn't that fun, right? But there's something
Engaging about it.
engaging about it in terms of your physiology, right? So it's going a step above
Mm-hmm.
because
I mean, engagement is key because if you're not involving your users or customers in interacting with the product, then I mean it's still a step in what the users want in the end, because they want something that they can play around with, just hold it. It has some amount of weight to it. It's all comes to the tangible aesthetics of it. Yeah.
yeah. So when you're looking at AI,
Mhm.
how do designers deal? What are the aesthetics or the tangibles of AI?
So that's an
What can you
ongoing
manipulate
debate
with?
right now. So basically, AI is still pretty much inside a black box at the moment, and it's and then that's the ongoing debate right now. Like, how much can you actually explain to people what is going on? Because the first impression that everyone gives when you say the words AI or artificial intelligence, it's basically like, oh, that sounds complicated. Maybe crazy robots are gonna come, but people know so little about it. And but actually it is quite straightforward. Like, AI at this, first of all, I prefer calling it augmented intelligence and not artificial intelligence, only because I feel like at this point AI as we see it is doing
Mhm,
what people do but better and faster.
mhm,
So there are certain things AI is great at this point, like, let's say personalization, or
mhm,
when it comes to like data handling multiple variables or generating different variations, so or customization or recommendation systems. Like, AI
mhm,
is really good at that. So but at the same time, what is AI not good at? It's like understanding nuances, for example, or creating
mhm,
original content, or filtering bias, which is an ongoing debate right now. So the key thing right now is like to actually understand what AI can do for you right now and what
mhm,
AI can't do for you right now. And that's when designers step in, to make sure that people understand the differences and where AI is at the moment. And also when you're using AI to create new products and services, you do that with a lot of empathy in mind, keeping the user at the center of it, involving all the stakeholders when you're actually designing something, but at the same time, keeping in mind the fundamentals of ethics and bias, because that is
mhm,
something that AI is really struggling with. And in order to make
mhm.
sure that people accept it even more, ethics and bias is two things that needs to be addressed at the moment.
So how, as you as a designer, how do you think about ethics?
That's It's complicated, but for me,
Yeah.
it goes hand in hand with bias for me at the moment.
Mhm,
Um, so how do I see ethics? This is actually very interesting. It First of all, it varies from place to place. Second, depending on what kind of product and service you're actually dabbling with, it kind of
mhm,
varies. But at the same time, from the way I see it, as long as it does not hurt anyone, as long as
mhm.
the AI does not go off on its own and deduces information that would be harmful for someone or something, I think that's
So,
fine.
but how would the AI know that? And one thing I've been pondering is um, different ethical frameworks from different cultures. So in the West, we have a very strong Judeo-Christian tradition, and so there's this ethical lineage,
Mm,
but it's not necessarily shared in other countries and other cultures. In China, they have a Confucian tradition, and it's so it's not this one way. There are many different ways. So when you're creating an AI, which ethical framework do you use? Which one do you choose? Or are you even conscious that you're making a choice about the ethical framework? Or do you just default, if I'm an American, Western, I'm going to default to this Judeo-Christian tradition. And if I can remember my first year of a freshman world, you know, world cultures and world civ, and and I go, oh yeah, I took a course on that one time. I took a survey course. But
Yeah,
it's just like it's sort of in the back of your mind. But like your family of origin is from India.
yeah.
So what's the value set, for instance, from someone who would come from India? And of course, India has many religions and many. Do you have competing ethical frameworks in India?
Actually, I haven't seen the cultural influence. Don't know much about the cultural influence of when it comes to ethics and AI at the moment. I've only seen it from like a design and business perspective at this point. So
Hmm.
I haven't actually really actually evaluated the cultural aspect. But at the same time, like the way I see it, there is an ethical hierarchy of needs when it comes to designing AI. So first of all, the base, I see it as like it needs to be decentralized, private, open, and at the same time secure. Then it has to be functional and reliable, and most of all is the human experience and respect that comes into when you're using AI for anything. So I guess like human experience and respect being the key words here. That is primarily what you need to keep in mind when it comes to doing anything with AI.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. So, have you what kind of projects or what kind of things could you point us to in terms of a really good implementation of AI that serves humanity or that creates a great experience?
in terms of like, are you talking about social good or in terms of like a product or a service?
You
Like,
get to choose.
okay, so for me, I'm personally right now very interested in how AI can actually help with social good. Like,
Mhm.
there's a lot of ongoing research about like how AI could be used in uh, different sets. For example, like um, um, I know Google is doing a research on how AI is actually helping with forecasting floods and hurricanes and cyclones
Mm.
that could be quickly used to see like what immediate response systems need to be sent out. Same thing with the fires, for example, in California. There's so many fires almost every year, and forecast like actually predicting that, getting real-time information at the same time sending out dispatching like a response team or
Mhm.
alerting people. That is currently what AI is doing at the moment. But on a global scale, like the biggest concern in the world right now is climate change, and AI is currently actually helping us monitor the CO2 levels. At the same time, with the whole coral reef situation that's happening in Australia and overfishing that's happening, it's actually helping us map out and predict data that could be used for future and and that helps us to actually see what steps we need to take at the moment to minimize losses almost.
Mhm.
So I think that is something that is AI is being heavily used for, and that is for environmental and social good at the moment.
Mhm. So, do you think we could use AI to get people to wear their masks?
Oh, that is a debate. And honestly, for me, when I see people wearing masks, it's almost foreign to me because nobody here does that. I have
Interesting.
not seen a single person in Sweden that actually wears a mask.
I was told recently that I think there was a quote from the Minister of Health, and I don't know if this is accurate because I didn't actually read the news article myself, so this is secondhand. So make of that what you will. That it was a calculated decision to let the Swedish population do what they wanted to do because they said there was no way they could actually enforce any kind of crackdown because Swedish society would reject that. Was that really the case?
That is true. People have too much faith in their respective citizens, and they have a lot of faith in their government, so they kind of trust what they're doing and what everyone else is doing. I've seen people be very respectful with each other when it comes to maintaining distance and stuff, but at the same time, it was almost too bizarre because I have family and friends all over the world, and everywhere there was a
Mhm.
lockdown, and everyone's wearing a mask at the moment. We could
Mhm.
not even find sanitizers for the longest time over here. So
Yeah.
it was,
So when you think, so when we go back to like our earlier discussion point of how you design AI based on a particular point of view or particular sensibility. So imagine the Swedish AI for COVID, right? And the Swedish AI for COVID is saying, we're not going to apply any social controls because we don't believe we should do any social controls for people because that's just our our ethical or behavioral framework of how we think we should treat people. So we're not going to tell you to wear masks. We're not going to tell you go about your business, and we'll take the casualties. You know, some people are going to die. Oh well. And that would be the Swedish AI, right? Coming from
it is basically it, and it's
right.
you put it that way, kind of sounds super terrifying, actually. Yeah,
But versus like say the New Zealand AI, right? So say you had the New Zealand AI, and the New Zealand AI is like say represented by Jacinta Ardern, right? And says we're going to do a strict shutdown. We're going to shut this mother down for like 6 weeks. Get it to zero. Everyone's with the program. Go Team Kiwi, yay, right? And so you
yeah.
export that AI,
Oh my God, yeah, that is the dream.
right?
That is the dream.
But you see what I mean, depending upon who's designing the AI and setting up the rules or the conditions, you can get a very different outcome. And if you're not self-aware of that, or the buyer isn't aware, like what if this AI is not congruent with my implicit ethical framework? Is that, I know that that's been a discussion with autonomous vehicles, and if you, I don't know in terms of what you were doing at BMW with autonomous vehicles, but you know, what's BMW's solution to the trolley car versus Kia out of South Korea, right?
That's
Or an Italian car. What does the Italian AI, what do they conclude when you're going to get in a collision? Who are we going to save, right? And have
that's true.
all those cars on the road, and they all have different, slightly different ethical points of view on this fundamental problem.
See, again, it all depends on what kind of data you're actually feeding in the end.
Well,
So
yeah.
so obviously, it depends. Like, let's say over here, maybe people are more relaxed. So the AI is going to take a more relaxed approach when it comes to actually implementing what it's supposed to do, compared to maybe, let's say, in Italy, where people were more strict about all of this. So that's going to take a different approach altogether. So, but that's the biggest issue now, because all the data that we have right now, I wouldn't say all the data, but most of the data we have for anything in the world, when we're feeding into an algorithm, it's it has some amount of bias, and
And
that
where's most of the source? Where's most of the source data coming from?
with respect to cars or
I don't know. I don't know where I go for my AI data training set. Where's the store? Do you order it on Amazon? I mean, where do you get your data from?
there for depending on what kind of project you're working on, there's also there's a lot of data that's available almost everywhere. Data is
Yeah.
anything. It could be your name, it could be what are you doing right now, or what you googled. It's everything is data at the moment.
So how can you distinguish between real data and fake data for an AI? What if you fed the AI fake data to skew the result? It's sort of like what happened to that Microsoft Twitter bot,
Oh yeah.
remember?
Oh,
Right? And it got trolled, and then the next thing you knew, it was this Nazi spewing troll bully horrible bot, like within 24 hours, because basically the collective intelligence of Twitter reprogrammed it.
that's when the concept of responsible AI comes in. So you
Mhm.
have to, when you're doing, you gotta like keep in mind, like I said, this is where ethics plays a huge role. You cannot be feeding any kind of data, because it's going to spew out results that are not desired. So that's when you gotta be responsible, and you gotta make sure that you're actually feeding in the right data to get desirable results. And you gotta make sure that the machine or algorithm does not overlearn, because let's say you feed the machine with a little bit of bias, over time that bias is going to be amplified, and it's going to give horrible results. So you
Mhm.
got to be very responsible and careful what you're actually feeding in, and that's
So
ethics in the end.
so it sounds like it sounds like being a good parent.
Almost, yeah, because you're actually training. You're training a machine that needs to be taught everything from scratch. So
So, should there be a higher standard for people who train AI
I would not say a higher standard because again, when
in
you use,
terms of how they are as people? If they're trained, it's like, are these people, are they going to make good parents?
so again, like higher standard again, if I feel like that's a bias as well. Like you're
Mm,
actually filtering out so much when you're sticking to a higher standard. So again, I think it's that's the whole thing right now. So what kind of data are you going to feed? What kind of results do you actually need? So that's
hmm
why AI is not being heavily implemented in the sector of like employment or hiring because there's so much bias that's even there right now. So and there isn't enough data that will actually help filter out the bias at the moment.
hmm
So you have to, I think it depends how you're training it in the end and who you're
Oh,
training it. It's complicated, and it's not everyone
absolutely.
actually see has actually found a way to do this in an easier way. So you kind of have to just be very careful when it comes to training an algorithm.
So I know that you've been designing a framework
Yes.
for designers for AI. Can you talk us through it and why how you came about it and I've seen it. It's gorgeous. It's a really wonderful framework. I love it. Um, and how do you envision designers, especially, when you're interacting with designers, what kind of questions come up for them when they think about using AI or incorporating it in their product design?
So, like I said, you know, one of the major, there are a lot of misconceptions that people have about AI at the moment, but when you actually sit down and actually see how it works, it's so simple. And I feel like that initial, reaction that people have, like, oh, it's too complicated, it's too technical. My focus is kind of actually removing that, stepping away from that.
Mhm.
And I'm telling designers, like, you know what, jump head first. You want to design a solution or a service or a product that involves some amount of AI, think about all the big ideas you have,
Mhm.
put it out there, and then think about your users, think about your stakeholders, like put your big idea out of there. And once you've actually narrowed down on what your final idea looks like, then look at the technical side of it. Get a friend who is a ML engineer or is a data scientist and see if it's actually feasible from a technical point of view. So that way, actually, you're not
Mhm.
filtering out all the great ideas from the start. You're actually putting everything out there, and then once you have your big idea, you actually evaluate the opportunities and evaluate what AI can do for you, see all the capabilities, and actually then evaluate the kind of data you need, and then work on your final ideas. So
Mm.
that's what I would.
So, so the design principles still hold, even though we have these new technologies. It's not like we're running around saying, where can I poke this AI into something? You start out with what's a problem I'm trying to solve fundamentally, or what's the opportunity or the new capability that I want to bring into the world, right? I like to think of products as rather than problem solving as capability
Exactly.
enhancing, right? Because
Exactly.
I like to um, build things that help people become or do what they want to do. So things that
Exactly.
are aspirational that lift them up. So you figure that out, and then you do the reverse design and say, oh, is AI appropriate for this or not?
No, so basically the way I
Yes?
see it is like once you have your big ideas, then I feel like you need to run like I call this phase zero in my framework. Like, is AI to solve this problem? Is AI necessary? Does your big idea need AI? And if even if it does need AI, what can AI do for you at the moment that's going to help you solve this problem? That involves your big idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I have that. Then I think about like the use case and the ecosystem that it belongs to, and then actually making sure the intent that it was this whole project was started is still like the integrity is still there in the end. So, yeah.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Um, there, three things. I'm going to ask you three things in terms of what our listeners can learn from you, what you want them to go out and learn about AI, what they might change, and what they might do. And my do is always like, what could they start doing on Monday morning based on
With respect
on
to
what you know?
AI.
Yeah.
All right, so I think one thing everyone can learn about is honestly what AI can do for you at the moment and where AI is being used at the moment. We don't realize it, but Netflix has it, Amazon has it, all these recommendations that show up, that's all AI. So actually identifying and learning about where AI is being used at the moment is
Mhm.
actually a huge thing. I think once you're more aware of what's happening and where it's being used, what kind of data it's been using, it actually shapes a lot of your choices and your behavior online.
Mhm.
So I think that's very essential to be aware of that.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I want people to learn to change with respect to AI. I think the misconceptions that people have, but again that comes with awareness. The moment you learn where it's being used and how it's being used, I think people will be more accepting of it. And I think and that comes with the
Mhm.
behavior change. So just I think just being aware of where AI is being used will contribute to this change.
Mhm.
And to do that's a tough one actually. So I would, from a designer's point of view, I've seen that whenever we work on projects that involve AI to a certain extent, we've realized that we need to see how it's going to hold, how the system's going to hold 5 or 10 years from now. And every time we try to design that far ahead in the future, we try to make sure that there's a constant feedback loop, and for that you need to be documenting almost everything. So and through that you learn about like people's behavior, you learn about what kind of data is going in and what kind of aspects you're actually looking into when you're designing anything. So kind of like creating like a regular feedback loop and at the same time documenting this entire process. I think that's something I think designers can do when it comes to AI.
Great. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. I am very enthusiastic about seeing how your design tool for AI evolves. And for people who are interested, how can they contact you or learn more about your work?
So I'm actually going to go public with a website called designingforai.co. So it's going to be released at the end of August. So I think that's when people can learn more about it and get access to the framework.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, okay, great. And so we will have the link to Avantika's website in the show notes. And Avantika, if there are any other resources, you'll let me know and I'll add them to the show notes as well in terms of things that people might read up on, articles or
I am
other 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 resources so people can come up the learning curve, right?
So I'm actually creating my own set of resources that everyone can access to. It's going to be on the website as well, like resources to get you started and learn more about AI and how AI is relevant in the field of design at the moment. So,
Fantastic. I think we just solved for X, where X is AI, right?
yes, at least in the world of design.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time.
So much, Margarita.